You know, sometimes you find things buried in old government archives that are just chilling. Tucked away deep in the old Soviet files is a proposal that sounds like it's straight out of a horror movie. It wasn't about a new tank or a spy network. It was a plan, a fully funded government plan to create a being that was part human and part ape. Seriously. This is a story of one of the weirdest and frankly most disturbing experiments ever put on paper. I mean, just think about that for a second. Could you actually crossbreed a human and an ape? It sounds like bad science fiction, right? But here's the crazy part. This wasn't fiction at all. The Soviet government, back in the day, was dead serious about finding out. And they were ready to throw a whole lot of money at the problem to get an answer. Yep, you heard that right. In the 1920s, the Soviet government actually paid a scientist to figure this out. This was a real, official, state-funded program. And the goal wasn't just some scientific curiosity. Oh no, they wanted to engineer this hybrid creature for a very specific and honestly pretty terrifying purpose. So let's get into the why. This wasn't some noble quest for scientific knowledge. This was a military project, plain and simple. The Soviets weren't trying to expand our understanding of biology. They were trying to build Stalin's ultimate weapon. And what was this weapon supposed to be? Well, they had a name for it. The Humanzee. Just picture it. A soldier with the raw, brutal strength of a chimpanzee, but also the ability to understand and follow human orders. A warrior that feels no fear, has no political beliefs, and doesn't ask any inconvenient questions. That was the terrifying dream. Now, you might be thinking the guy behind this must have been some kind of mad scientist, right? Working out of a creepy castle somewhere. But no, the mastermind was Professor Ilya Ivanov, and he was one of the most celebrated scientists in the country. He was an international expert in his field, a pioneer of artificial insemination. This wasn't some fringe lunatic. This was a serious scientist who was completely convinced he could pull this off. Okay, so how on earth does a project this out there get the green light from the government? Well, you have to understand the time period. This was all happening in the wake of the Bolshevik Revolution, a moment when the old world was completely shattered and everything in Russia was being reinvented from the ground up. And this table here, it just sums it up perfectly. The old Tsarist Russia was all about faiths, tradition, this idea of a divine order. The new Soviet Union, it was the exact opposite. Science was the new religion. Atheism was state policy. And power, raw power, was everything. They saw science not just as a tool for discovery, but as a weapon to destroy the old ways and build their new world. And that gets to the heart of their motivation. I mean, think about it. What could be more powerfully, provocatively anti-religious than proof that human beings were simply advanced animals? If Ivanov succeeded, it would be a bombshell. It would be, in their eyes, definitive proof that there was no God, no divine spark, no soul, just biology. Biology that the state could control and engineer for its own purposes. So, with the government's blessing and a pocket full of cash, Ivanov's bizarre plan was officially a go. The first stop on his quest for the Humanzee wasn't in some secret lab in Moscow, but thousands of miles away in West Africa. So in 1925, he gets a grant for $10,000. And you have to remember, that was an insane amount of money back then. By February 1926, he's in French Guiana at a research station, and just a month later, in March, he does it. He takes human sperm and inseminates 3 female chimpanzees. The experiment had begun. So what happened? Well, it was a total failure. The poor chimps, they just couldn't handle the stress of being captured and experimented on, and they died before anyone could even confirm if a pregnancy had taken hold. But here's the thing. This failure didn't stop Ivanov. In fact, it's what led him to an even darker, even more disturbing plan. Yeah, so with his African experiments in shambles, Ivanov goes back to the Soviet Union and comes up with a new idea. An unthinkable one, really. He decides to flip the whole experiment on its head. If he couldn't use female apes, he was going to bring the horror right back home. He basically asked himself this chilling question. If female apes didn't work, what if he reversed it? What if he used ape sperm and human women? And this, right here, is where the story goes from being a bizarre scientific quest to a potential atrocity. And it gets worse. In his own letters, which we have, Ivanov actually proposed going to a hospital and inseminating women without their knowledge during routine exams. He wanted to do this secretly. To him, it wasn't some horrible violation. It was just practical science. Now, as far as we know, that horrible plan to experiment on women without their consent never actually happened. Thank goodness. Instead, Ivanov tried something else. He put out a very vague ad in a magazine, just looking for volunteers for some kind of scientific experiment. And you won't believe it. 5 women actually responded. And this is a quote from one of their actual letters. A volunteer, who we only know as G, wrote this: "I am a committed materialist and an atheist. I am willing to participate in the experiment." She was a widow of the Civil War, and she just had this absolute unwavering faith in the Soviet state and its science. So much faith that she was willing to do this. We have no idea what happened to her. But before this second reversed experiment could ever really get off the ground, the whole project just collapsed. It fell apart. And then the state went to work making sure that nobody would ever know it happened. And they were so methodical about how they erased it from history. First, his last remaining ape, his key subject, died in 1929. Then Ivanov himself got swept up in Stalin's purges. You see, he had a lot of international contacts, which suddenly made him a political target. So he was arrested in 1930, sentenced to exile, and died a couple of years later. And the final step? The government sealed all the archives. The whole project was classified, and the story was buried for the next 60 years. So for decades, the story of the Humanzee was just this wild rumor, this ghost story. But then the Soviet Union fell, the archives opened up, and the truth came out. And what's wild is that this failed experiment from almost 100 years ago, it might be more relevant today than it's ever been. Here's the thing. We now know, thanks to modern science, that Ivanov's project was basically doomed from the start. It's a simple matter of chromosomes. Humans have 46, and chimps have 48. That difference, that chromosomal incompatibility, makes a successful hybrid almost certainly impossible. But, and this is the important part, Ivanov had no way of knowing that. The science to understand chromosomes just wasn't there yet. And that kind of reframes the whole story, doesn't it? It's easy to paint Ivanov as just this monster, this mad scientist. But maybe he's more of a cautionary tale. He was a brilliant scientist, following the evidence that was available to him at the time. But he was also completely captured by an ideology, a government that told him there were no ethical limits, that anything was okay as long as it served the state. And you can draw a straight line from what he was trying to do to where we are today. Look at this timeline. You start with Ivanov's experiment in 1926. Then we discover the structure of DNA. Then, boom, CRISPR gene editing is invented in 2012. And where does that lead? To today, to military research and to bioenhancement. The ambition to create a better soldier never really went away. It's just the technology that has gotten a whole lot more powerful. So in the end, Ivanov's Humanzee was never born. But its ghost, that idea, it has never really left the laboratory. And it leaves us with this really unsettling question, right? Ivanov failed to create his super soldier because he was limited by biology. So who's trying to do it today with technology that might actually work?